Netflix announces that the 2311 and Bubba Wallace documentary will be released on February 22nd. Josh Bilicki will drive for Alpha Prime Racing for 6 races, and the Martinsville Spring Race is being shortened from 500 laps to 400 laps. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We've got a ton of NASCAR and other motorsports stories to discuss here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're going to start off with all the paint schemes and sponsorship news. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into it. The first paint scheme we're going to be taking a look at is Chase Elliott's 2022 Hooters scheme that we're going to see in 3 races in 2022. It's unfortunate that the Night Owl scheme is gone. I really like the Night Owl scheme. That being said, though, I really like this paint scheme. Of course, this is designed by Lefty Noah Sweet. Noah Sweet designed a lot of really good paint schemes over the years, and he did a really great job on this scheme. The number's in a really good position, and they do a really good job utilizing the sponsor placements. So this paint scheme looks really great in my opinion, and I'm looking forward to see this paint scheme out on the racetrack in a couple races in 2022. The next paint scheme we're going to take a look at is Jet Burton's 2022 Alsco uniform scheme that we're going to see in many races in 2022. This paint scheme looks really good in my opinion. Good to see that Alsco Uniforms is going to be sponsoring Jet Burton throughout the year 2022. We knew that State Water Heaters, which has been a company that's been associated with the Burton family for many years, was also working with them as well. This is really good, and I'm looking forward to see this paint scheme out on the racetrack in 2022. The next paint scheme we're going to take a look at is Jeremy Clemens' 2022 Stop 1 All-Stop Electra.com scheme that we're going to see in about 5 or 6 races in 2022. Paint scheme looks pretty good in my opinion. The color scheme looks really great, and I think they did a really good job on this paint scheme, and I'm looking forward to see it out on the racetrack in 2022. The next paint schemes we're going to take a look at is BJ McLeod's 2022 Skyview Partner scheme that we're going to see in the LA Clash. I like this paint scheme a lot. The number's in a really good position, and I like the orange and the white contrast on the car. They did a really great job on this paint scheme, and I'm looking forward to see it out on the racetrack in the LA Clash. The next paint scheme we're going to take a look at is Spencer Boyd's 2022 Hero Club scheme, as they'll be sponsoring him once again in the Truck Series in 2022 at Young's Motorsports. Pretty good paint scheme, in my opinion. Hero Club, like I said, has been associated with Spencer Boyd for the last couple years now. I think it's a really nice looking paint scheme, and I'm looking forward to see it out on the Truck Series in 2022. I think did a great job on it, to be honest with you. The next paint scheme we're going to take a look at is William Byron's 2022 Valvoline scheme that we're going to see in the LA Clash. In my opinion, this paint scheme looks pretty decent in my opinion. It's not my favorite paint scheme. I don't like how the white contrast goes through the number. That's one thing I don't like, but it's not overall a terrible looking paint scheme. There are good things about it, and there's also some not some great things about it, but I think it's overall a decent looking paint scheme, and hopefully it will give William Byron an opportunity to perform well in the LA Clash. It's an alright paint scheme, but it's not my favorite paint scheme released, to be honest with you. The next paint scheme we're going to take a look at is Zane Smith's 2022 Michael Roberts construction scheme that we're going to see in 6 races in 2022. They continue their partnership with Zane Smith that they've had for the last couple of years now as they come over to Front Row Motorsports in 2022. I like this paint scheme a lot. Michael Roberts, good. I really like the paint schemes that they do for Zane Smith. They did really solid and a really great job on it, and I like this, and I'm looking forward to see this paint scheme out on the racetrack in 2022. And the final paint scheme we are taking a look at is Ryan Ellis' 2022 Keen Parts scheme that we're going to see in 6 races in 2022. Really cool to see the Keen Parts is continuing work with Ryan Ellis. There was talk that they were not going to be no longer sponsoring again in 2022, but I think it's really awesome that they are continuing their partnership with Michael Roberts Construction heading into next year. So overall, I think that it's very exciting, very cool, and I'm really happy to see that they are continuing their partnership with this team heading into 2022. I think it's really awesome and really great, to be honest with you. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Daytona International Speedway, as they posted on their Twitter page their trial over grass design that revealed Great American Race on the grass. I think it's a really great design that they put on there, to be perfectly honest with you. The fact that they have Great American Race on there, it basically should symbolize what the race is. And of course, the Daytona 500 is the Great American Race. So you want that as your grass design, and you want that to be eye-catching and engaging. And I think they did a really great job on the grass sign. I think it looks really solid. I think it looks really cool, and I'm very happy to see that that is what they're doing for 2022. I think it's a great thing, to be honest with you. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about the Busch Light Clash at the LA Coliseum. Now, someone brought up basically on Twitter about what that work area was inside of the infield. And Bob Pockers did answer and respond to this question. And he says that in that area where the image is circled, he says that it is a work area where teams will be able to work on the cars during the cautions or during after the heat races. Of course, couple of pit crew members per car will be allowed in the infield. I don't know how many will be there, but I think they'll probably allow about 2 or 3 people inside the infield for the LA Clash to work on the cars. Again, there's no designated pit road this year due to the race being really, really short, only 150 laps. Fuel mileage will be something that really is not a major concern throughout this year, especially during the LA Clash. That being said, that's very interesting. That is the work area inside the track. There was talk there was going to be a work area outside of the track, so it's going to be inside the track in the LA Coliseum. We're coming up to the LA Coliseum, the race, the LA Clash race, which has 70% attendance currently at the moment of new people going to the race, and it's expected to potentially sell out this year. So really cool to see that is a work area that is being used. I think it's really, really solid. Very, very awesome, and I think it's a great thing, to be honest with you, for the sport. Really cool to see that for sure. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about some updated stage lengths for the NASCAR Xfinity Series and the NASCAR Cup Series. Now, the Xfinity Series and Truck Series, their stage lengths basically got officially finalized. The Cup Series, some of the stage lengths have already been revealed for the first 7 or 8 races, but the other lengths of the races have not been announced in the stages due to the fact that they're wanting to look at the fuel mileage for the Cup Series. Again, I don't know why they got rid of fuel mileage races. Don't ask me on that part. But here are some races in Xfinity Series and Truck Series where their stage lengths got officially updated. So, Homestead Xfinity Series race has increased from a 250-mile race up to a 300-mile race. I think that's a really, really great change, and it's going to show attrition throughout the race as well. For the Vegas Xfinity Series race, it's now only a 200-mile race. It drops 1 mile in the race, making it, I think, a 133-lap race. For Xfinity Series, not much of a change right there. For the Atlanta Truck Series race, it'll now be 135 laps as 130 laps. That's because of the change of the name. I think it's going to be a 210-mile race for the Atlanta race. That's why they're increasing, or 208-mile race, I think, excuse me, for that race. That's why they're increasing up to 135 laps. And then for the Coda Truck race, they're only making 1 lap change from 41 laps up to 42 laps for even distribution through the stages. Overall, I think these are some pretty good changes they made for the stages. I think there were some other changes, but these were the notable changes for the stage lengths for the NASCAR Truck Series and the NASCAR Xfinity Series. Overall, I think that these are some really good and really, really positive changes. I think this is really, really cool, and I'm glad they made these changes for 2022. And now we're going to go and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Ernie Francis Jr. As was officially announced yesterday, as expected, that Ernie Francis Jr. will be competing in Indy Lights in 2022 in the number 99 Force Indy. For those who don't know, Ernie Francis Jr. is a 7-time Trans Am champion. He's only 23 or 24 years old, and he was a standout star in the SRX, picking up a victory at the Indianapolis Raceway Park, IRP, and was able to pick up that victory there and did an incredible job through the SRX, finishing second in the championship in that. And there was talk maybe he's going to come over to NASCAR, but also Roger Penske really wanted to bring Ernie Francis Jr. into the series for Indy Lights. When I look at Ernie Francis Jr.'s opportunity and chances to win the championship this year, I think absolutely. I think Ernie Francis Jr. has a very strong and a really good possibility of winning the championship this year in Indy Lights. There's some really good competition this year in Indy Lights, and there's more cars going to be in Indy Lights, I think, than we've had in years. But I think that he has a very strong and a very, very good possibility of winning the Indy Lights Championship heading into this year. And I think Ernie Francis Jr. is someone I think will be in the Indy 500 in the next couple years. And I think eventually he's going to go to Team Penske's IndyCar program, since to bring him in development. I think that Ernie Francis Jr. is someone over the years that's going to be really, really fun to watch. I think he's going to get at least 3 or 4 victories, and I think he's going to win the championship in Indy Lights this year, which I think will be great for the sport if he can do that. So I'm really excited to see what Ernie Francis can do in 2022, and hopefully he can have a great year with the team heading into 2022. So I think the more competition you have and the more people you have in the series that are good, the better it's going to be for everybody. So I'm really excited to see what Ernie Francis Jr. can do in 2022. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about IMSA. Now, this weekend, of course, is going to be the Rolex 24, which will actually be taking place tomorrow. Some of you might be watching this on Saturday, but there will be the Rolex 24 that is taking place this weekend. But there is going to be, was an announcement that was made officially yesterday about the top class of the new LMDH, and that is going to be called the GTP, also known as Grand Touring Performance, starting in 2023. The actually used to be called Grand Touring Performance back in the 80s and the 90s during the golden age of IMSA. And we're starting to get back kind of into that golden age of IMSA once again in 2023 with LMDH coming in. So many different manufacturers are going to be joining IMSA, because what LMDH is not only can you bring it over to Daytona race, but you also get take it over and running, I think, in Nürburgring or Le Mans, if I'm not mistaken. So you can take it over to those respective series and run the same type of cars. You can't do that right now in IMSA with the World Endurance Championship. You can't bring a World Endurance Championship car with like the Toyotas and stuff and bring them over to IMSA and race at Daytona. But with this new collaboration happening in 2023, you absolutely can do that now. This, of course, is with the association of ASC, the World Endurance Championship, and with IMSA. This is a collaboration heading in next year where we might see some different manufacturers like Peugeot come back and run this event. Audi come back and run. They used to run, I think, these races back in the day, among other brands like Porsche, who could run the Rolex 24 as well. We're in the golden era and golden age of IMSA prototype racing right now, and IMSA is growing. I mean, look at the entry list this year for IMSA. 61 cars, which I believe is the largest entry list ever for the Rolex 24. So overall, I am extremely excited for this going next year that they're doing this. I think it's really, really awesome, really, really great, and I'm looking forward to see this. I'm happy that they're going into the golden era of IMSA racing heading into 2023. I think it's going to be exciting for IMSA for the future. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Ford. As Ford announced earlier today that they are going to be officially returning to sports cars in 2023 with a GT4 car. So they will not be racing technically in IMSA in 2023. But in 2024, there is going to be 2 Ford cars that are going to be returning in 2024 with Multimatic Racing as the organization, running that in GT3, which is technically the GTD class. This has been expected. There have been reports that this was going to happen, and I think Ford coming back to run a GT car is absolutely incredible and absolutely awesome for the series, especially Multimatic Racing that currently competes over in the World Endurance Championship. Having them come back to the series, I think is absolutely awesome and absolutely a great thing for this series as well. And one thing this is also going to do is increase the size of the GTD field, which will be really, really fun. And I think that depending on what drivers they get for GTD in next year in their cars in 2024, I think it will be great for the sport of IMSA as a whole. And like I said, I'm really excited. I think IMSA's future, like I mentioned with GTP, I think the future of IMSA currently right now is very, very profitable and really, really exciting at this moment. So I think it's really, really awesome. I think it's really, really cool. And having Ford come back to the series, I think overall is very, very awesome and very, very exciting. So I'm looking forward to see what happens in regards to Ford's involvement in motorsports down the road. And we'll have to wait and see what happens. But I'm glad to see that Ford is making their involvement back into IMSA in 2023 and 2024 as well. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about the Fox broadcast booth for 2022. Now, there have been some announcements we already knew in regards to the Fox broadcast booth. We knew that Tony Stewart was going to be joining up in the booth for the Clash and the Daytona 500. We also know that Jamie Little, Regan Smith, and I think Vince Walsh will be pit reporters for the Daytona 500, and Tom Rinaldi will be doing like some of the voiceovers in the Prius, and Chris Myers will be there as well. But there were some other announcements made in regards to what the Fox broadcast booth is going to look like, especially for Daytona. For the NASCAR Xfinity Series opening race at Daytona, Denny Hamlin and Chad Knaus are going to be the guest analysts along with Adam Alexander. This will be the first time, I think, in a little bit that Denny Hamlin's been in the Fox Sports booth, and Chad Knaus, of course, has been in the Fox Sports booth for the Xfinity Series in the past. For the Truck Series, no surprise here, Kurt Busch will be back in the Truck Series booth for Fox in 2022 in a lot of races. I know that Kurt Busch is kind of limited to what he can do, but I think Kurt Busch, in my opinion, he is a really, really good reporter and a really, really good job as a broadcaster. I think Kurt Busch was ever to retire, it doesn't go into some sort of role with the teams. I think he could do a really, really good job working inside these organizations and work as inside Fox as well. So overall, I think, again, this lineup, I think, is really, really good. Denny Hamlin gives a lot of insightful information. I know that he can be someone that is very, very, and extremely controversial, but I think that if you bring him into especially into Fox Sports, having him come into the series, I think is really, really awesome, and I'm very excited to see what he can do this year in Fox. I think he'll probably be in all the playoff races again. I probably wouldn't be shocked either if we see like Denny Hamlin. I would also see Kurt Busch in all the playoff races as well. So overall, it's a good group that they've got going this year, and I'm really excited to see how Kurt Busch will do in 2022 in the Fox Sports booth. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Formula One. Now, I've got a couple Formula One stories we're going to be discussing here, but we're talking about what F1 is looking at currently doing at the moment. Now, behind the scenes right now, there is a lot of talk and discussion, and Michael Masi is going to end up getting fired from Formula One at the conclusion of this year, and they're planning to basically fire him before 2022. And the plan is currently what they're expected to do is hand out similar to what NASCAR does with their officiating. They're planning to hand it to a bunch of different people to run the race directory. But one thing that might be being planned for Formula One is green-white checkers. It's no secret that very recently in Formula One in the FIA that NASCAR has had some sort of influence out in the FIA, as Gary Crotty, who worked as a legal consultant for NASCAR, will be joining the FIA judging panel starting in 2022, and it'll be with them through 2022 to 2024. I think his contract ends in 2021. Now, let's first talk about Michael Masi leaving Formula, about him getting fired. I think it's a really, really great move. Look, in my personal opinion, I know that being a race director in Formula One is a very, very tough and a very, very difficult job. I would not be able to be put in that position and do a really, really good job in Formula One. That being said, the way that Michael Masi handled this year in Formula One, regardless of your side of it, whether you're a Max Verstappen fan or whether you are a Lewis Hamilton fan, the way that they handled this season in particular is just unacceptable. Especially when you're the race director in Formula One, you have to not be biased. And the way that, like I said, they handled this year, especially, the way they handled the end of the year in debacle. And by the way, I don't care what anybody says, Max Verstappen deserved that championship. He was better than Lewis Hamilton all season long. That being said, they screwed Lewis out of a really legitimate shot of winning the championship, but I'm not going to be pissed at them for the way they handled. But the way that the FIA handled it for only letting lap cars between Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen go, and not all the lap cars, stupid. They played an entertainment game, and they played an entertainment show, and that's why I think Michael Masi needs to 100% be fired from Formula One and be in the FIA directory. The other thing, talking about the green-white checkers in Formula One, why is this being considered? Why are they trying to go for more entertainment? Isn't Formula One supposed to be like the top motorsport in the world, like the most known motorsport and most legitimate? Why are they considering green-white checkers? I'll tell you probably why they're doing this, because of the Drive to Survive series. Look at the U.S. market. Look how big the U.S. is currently growing at the moment right now. Look at how many people from the United States are currently watching, and so many younger people are currently watching right now. That's probably why they're considering this. And in my opinion, you can't just focus on those people. You know what I mean? You have to focus on other different groups as well, and not just that specific group. So overall, I hope they don't implement green-white checkers, and I think that will be a really, really bad thing if they do go ahead and implement green-white checkers. So in my opinion, let's not implement green-white checkers, and let's just have a legitimate series once again, and stop playing to the Drive to Survive series and try to make the series legitimate again. So you don't have drivers like Lewis Hamilton potentially thinking about, hey, let's go ahead and retire from the sport, because the way that they handled it was absolutely horrendous. So in my opinion, Michael Masi needs to be fired from F1, and he's also don't need to see green-white checkers, but that's just my honest opinion on that situation. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Daniel Suarez. Now, Daniel Suarez, I believe, was being interviewed and was asked questions during media availabilities during the next-gen test. And one thing that he was really excited about is he cannot wait for the 2022 season to begin with Trackhouse Racing and the introduction of the next-gen car and the expansion of Trackhouse Racing as well. We already noticed that Trackhouse Racing is expanding to a two-car operation in 2022, with Daniel Suarez returning to the car in 2022, and Ross Chastain joining the one car for the team in 2022 as well. Now, let's be honest with ourselves. In 2021, for this team, they were pretty good at points, but also struggled at points. In 2021, despite having having one or two top fives here, they still finished 25th in the points this year, and were worse than 23XI Racing by the end of this season, because they had a lot of mechanical failures throughout this year. But I think that Trackhouse Racing heading into 2022, for both drivers are getting this year, I think they have a very strong possibility and a really strong chance to really improve heading into 2022. My prediction is that I think both drivers have a very strong possibility of finishing in the top 20 in points. I think not only is Daniel Suarez going to improve heading into this year, but I also think Ross Chastain is going to do a really good job heading into this year as well as he joins the team. I think Ross Chastain is definitely an underdog to make the playoffs this year, just because Ross Chastain has done an incredible job as a driver in this respective series. And I know that last year he finished 20 points with Chip Ganassi Racing, but that's kind of where I expected him to run most of the year. And I think that Trackhouse will be a better team heading this year, and I think that with the assistance of the next-gen car coming in, I think that's something that really is going to help him out heading into this season. So overall, I'm very excited to see what's going to happen with this team heading into this year, and I think Daniel Suarez assignment should be warranted because I think that both drivers could have a big year with the team, so we'll have to wait and see what happens. But Daniel Suarez says he's excited for the year, and overall for me, I am very excited for this upcoming season as well with him in the car. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Gaunt Brothers Racing. Now, I was sent something in regards to Gaunt Brothers Racing and what the plans for them for 2022, and there was a bio that came up on their old page saying that they were looking to run full-time in 2022 in the year. Well, that is actually not true, as Bob Pox actually sent this to Bob Pox as well, and he responded to me on his Twitter as well, and he says the team is still currently deciding on what races they will run in 2022, and they're not expected to race in the Daytona 500 as well. No surprises here. It's been kind of expected they were not going to run in the Daytona 500 in 2022. They do currently have a next-gen chassis heading into 2022, but right now they're not really wanting to risk that at this given moment, at this time. And they don't want to risk bringing out a next-gen chassis going into Daytona, especially if only one chassis right now. They don't want to risk running more races. Now, they are planning down the road to run some races in like 2022, because again, they do have that next-gen chassis, but they're not planning to run all the races this year, and they're only looking at maybe running a few super speed races down the road once they get more chassis. I think once they do get more chassis, I think they're going to run more races, but at least we're going to see Gaunt Brothers Racing on the track this year at some point. It's just that they're not going to run the Daytona 500 as they try to save that chassis, which makes a lot of sense. If they do run this year, I think they'll be also looking at drivers in their Toyota programs. Guys like Brandon Jones. Even Parker Kligerman would probably be considered to run. Parker Kligerman was running top 20 most of the race at Kansas. It was in the top 15 and close to running in the top 10 points at Kansas with a Gaunt Brothers Racing car. So I think that Gaunt Brothers Racing will eventually go full-time in the future. Maybe 2023 is something that I think they would be looking at to run when they eventually would run in full-time in a series. But we'll have to wait and see what happens. But Gaunt Brothers Racing not being expected to race is not a major surprise to me. So we'll have to wait down the road and see what happens. But it does not look like they'll be running much in 2022 as they try to save their next-gen chassis, which makes a lot of sense, to be honest with you. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Mike Harmon Racing. Now, we've talked about Mike Harmon Racing on this channel many, many times. And we talked about how they originally had a massive, massive fine and massive point penalties. Well, it was officially announced yesterday that Mike Harmon Racing no longer has a $50,000 fine nor 6-race crew chief suspension for violating the testing policy. The final appeal officer, Roger Warner, upheld the 75-point penalty, but rescinded fines and suspension based on 2022 rulebook wording that penalties can be applied on an and/or basis. Now, we've talked about how originally they got a massive, massive penalty for basically posting on their Twitter, I think it was on their Instagram and their Facebook as well, them at a charity event with a new car and then, of course, a old car at Rockingham. And, of course, that was for a charity event. And to me, at the time, I think they absolutely deserve the penalty because they violated the testing policy. That being said, though, NASCAR, I think, is making the right call, especially for a smaller team. I don't think they should have had that massive of a fine. I think that was a little bit ridiculous. I do agree, I think the points should have been rescinded, maybe down to maybe 40 points. I think that's what they should have done right there. But especially for a small team like that, they don't need to have the fine. So it's good right there, at least, that they're not going to have to worry about paying the fine. But they, of course, have the points penalty. But that's, of course, going to go to Mike Harmon and not the driver's driver. Now, let's be honest with ourselves. Mike Harmon's not going to make up 75 points here because last year they only got 166 points unless Mike Harmon wants to run every single race next year, which is very, very possible. But at the same time, I'm very happy that a small team like that isn't going to penalize. I think the rules are the rules, and you can't violate those testing policies. That being said, though, I think that NASCAR is overall making a really, really good and the right decision on their front to not upheld the penalties. Well, at least upheld the fines, because I don't think that they deserve to get as big of a fine as they did for basically a charity event. That's just my honest opinion on that, though, and that's a decision that they made. It's NASCAR decision. They have a right to make the call, and that's a decision on NASCAR's part for those penalties, and I'm glad that they decided to rescind those penalties, especially for a smaller team like that. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Formula 1 and Las Vegas. Now, we've talked about Formula 1 in Las Vegas in the past on this channel, and there's an update in regards to this. According to Adam Stern, F1 entities in Las Vegas are advancing close to a deal to bring a night race to the Strip per sources, and an official announcement could be made in the early first half of this year. F1 wants to run a race as soon as next year, 2023, though any delays could delay it till 2024. Currently in the United States, there are 2 races that will be in Formula 1. That'll be at Austin for COTA, Circuit of the Americas, and there's going to be a Miami Street Circuit in 2022 starting this year, which will take place around the same time as the Darlington Throwback Race for the NASCAR Cup Series. But there's also been anticipation talk about a street race in Las Vegas. Now, why is this being talked about, and why is this happening? Look at who's running the series right now. Liberty Media, a corporation, is currently running the series right now, and they are trying to expand to the U.S. audience. Consider that in the United States, you are getting a lot of races, especially now, that are getting into the million range for people watching the event. It's not getting up to NASCAR levels, but Formula 1 in the United States is one of the fastest growing sports in North America and the United States today right now, and we're seeing especially a lot of younger fans joining the sport right now and really, really loving the sport of Formula 1, especially this past year with the drama and the battle between Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen. You have a lot of anticipation, and in the U.S. market especially, there is so much demand for the U.S. market, especially like the artists they're getting and the people they're bringing out to who are talking about it, like YouTubers, big YouTubers that are coming out to these events. You're having a lot of anticipation and talking points coming out about Formula 1 at this given moment. So that's a big reason why we're seeing a huge and massive increase in talking points for a Las Vegas race. Overall, I think that they don't need to have an insane amount of races. I think that after Las Vegas, I think 3 races should be at the most that US has. I know that they're trying to expand that market and have more people get involved in Formula 1, but let's be for real and honest here. I think you have more than just 1 or 2. If you have more than 3 races in the US, you're going to overall oversaturate the market. I think at the most there need to be 3 races. That being said, of the fact that there is a talk about a Formula 1 race in Las Vegas, I think is very, very exciting, and I think it's really, really cool at the same time as well. Hopefully that we can see this succeed and do really, really good heading in 2022. I think it'll be great for the sport if it happens, to be perfectly honest with you. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about JTG Doherty Racing. Now, one of my friends on Twitter, Casey Campbell, also is a reporter, he recently had an interview with Tad Schechter from JTG Doherty Racing. Now, first thing he talked about in that tweet, of course, is the fact that right now they currently have 4 chassis at JTG Doherty Racing in regards to the next-gen car, and they have enough parts to build 3 next-gen chassis, which I think that's a really, really good thing at the moment, that we're starting to see teams get more parts and pieces. The fact that we're starting to see teams get more parts and pieces and chassis, considering there's been a huge shortage and a lot of issues with supply and demand and supply next-gen pieces, I think is a really, really good thing. But there's one thing in that tweet that I found very, very interesting, and one thing that was said is that Tad Schechter says that in the future that they could be returning to a 2-car team in the near future. Now, JT Doherty Racing, of course, in 2022, they are decreasing their size of their cars from 2 cars to 1 car in 2022. Multiple reasons for that. Number 1, they don't have enough funds for a second car right now, because the reason that they don't have enough funds for a second car is Ryan Preece, a driver who was in that car last year. He didn't really not have any funds. The other reason is they only want to focus on 1 car, because that second car was, you guessed it, an uncharted car, and they weren't going to have enough funds to run the whole season in 2022, which is why they decreased their size from 2 to 1 cars. Now, that being said, in the future, there's also talk of manufacturers coming into the sport and potential of getting charged. And that's one thing for JTG Doherty Racing down the road, is that if they're going to want to increase their size and back up to a 2-car team in the future, 1, they're going to have a driver that brings a lot of sponsorship and money into the team. And the other big thing for JT Doherty Racing heading into next year, well, in the future, is that they're going to have to get another charter if they want to run. Now, I do think long-term charters could be gone in the next couple years, but honestly, I think the charter system is probably going to continue being a thing long-term, especially when a new manufacturer comes in. You know that these teams in a race team alliance is not going to want to get rid of charters. But I think if we could see JT Doherty continue racing, I think that'd be really, really awesome. I hope that they do continue to race long-term down the road. JTG Doherty Racing continues. I think it'd be great for the sport as a whole if JTG Doherty Racing will continue, and hopefully, maybe down the road, we could see JTG Doherty Racing continue their branding in the sport, in the Cup Series. I think that would be great, to be perfectly honest with you. Now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Matt Benedetto. Now, Matt Benedetto very recently had an interview with Dustin Albini, who currently works at jski.com, and Matt Benedetto talked about what he's thinking about for 2022 as well. He says he's humbled himself and is looking forward to competing in the Truck Series in 2022. He says, I think I have more excitement going into this year than I have had in many, many years. Definitely a really interesting comment for sure that he said he's had a lot more exciting racing in the Truck Series this year than he has in the Cup Series or Xfinity Series in the past. Now, I think a lot of that is, of course, the fact that, one, he doesn't have as much pressure on himself heading into 2022 than he's had in the last couple years. Because in the Wood Brothers, in the Cup Series, you're expected to run in front, especially if you're in a really, really decent car like the Wood Brothers. And, of course, we know that Matt Benedetto is going to be racing the Truck Series here with the Rackley WAR organization in the 2022 season. And Matt Benedetto is going to have a lot less pressure on himself heading in this year. He's driving for a team that, while they're not a top tier team, they're not a bad team either. They're probably about going to be a mid-pack team this year, probably going to have some top 15s and some top 20s. But he also talks about how he's kind of humbled himself heading into this year. And that's one of my goals for Matt Benedetto heading into this year as a fan. I'm giving Matt Benedetto, honestly, a second chance. Because, honestly, the way that Matt Benedetto especially handled himself and the way that he handled his PR, especially when it comes to sponsorships, the way he's handled that over the last couple years has not been very, very good. And it's really affected his career. And why he did not really get a top-tier opportunity and a really, really good ride is because the way he handles sponsorships in the sport and the way he handled himself. I mean, people forget that he almost got kicked out of not racing at Phoenix with the Wood Brothers because the way that he handled himself and said, let's go Brandon. That's why he basically almost lost his opportunity to race at that Phoenix race. So one thing for Matt Benedetto is stay off of social media, get a PR person that can tell you right from wrong, have a PR guy run your social media accounts instead of you running the accounts, and be a better person. Because if he does that and just focuses on his racing craft, I think that's going to be overall better for Matt Benedetto. That's my advice to Matt Benedetto is, I actually like Matt Benedetto. I have nothing personal against him. I know it seems like I hate Matt Benedetto by the way I've acted, but I like Matty D a lot. I want him to do better as a person and just focus on his racing craft and do a better job on the racetrack and on his performance. That's one thing I want to see from Matt Benedetto this year. He needs to have realistic goals. Don't put pressure on himself like other drivers have in the Cup Series, and do as good as you can heading into this year. So overall, that's what I want to see from Matt Benedetto heading into 2022 in the NASCAR Camping World Truck Series. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the first of three major stories of today's episode, as we're talking about the Martinsville Spring Race. Yesterday it was announced that the Martinsville Spring Race is going to be shortened from 500 laps to 400 laps. The stages are going to be 80 laps for Stage 1, 100 laps for Stage 2, and then for the final stage, it's going to be 220 laps. And, of course, the fall playoff race is going to be a 500-lap race. I have some differences on this. I'm kind of neutral on the situation of them basically decreasing the length of the race and how many laps in the race. Let's start off with the positives. Number one, I think that, honestly, I'm not mad about them shortening the spring race. I think them shortening the spring race is a good thing, considering that the fall race is a race that tends to have a lot more intensity and a lot more memorable moments from the fall race, looking forward to what happened to Alex Bowman and Denny Hamlin on Halloween, then the spring race, where you don't see as much highlights come from the spring race as you see in the fall race. A lot more talking points come from the fall race. And another thing that's going to happen is, of course, it's going to increase the interest and the entertainment of the event. It's going to increase more entertainment. It's going to increase the value for the fans. And with it being a shorter race, more intensity and more people getting involved with the sport. I also am been a big proponent of shortening some of these races up. I personally think that Cup Series races should not be more than 3.5 hours long at the most. Maybe shorten down maybe a little bit more than that, but I don't think a Cup Series race should go over the 3.5 hour mark. To me, I think that most Cup Series races need to be decreased, except maybe the Bristol night race, the playoff race at Martinsville, and then, of course, all the Crown Jewel events should not be shortened, and the Super Speedway events. But here's a negative to this, in my opinion. Why would you shorten Martinsville and not shorten the track like Atlanta or Texas? To me, if we're going to shorten a race, why not shorten Texas or Atlanta? I don't think that Atlanta needs to be 500 miles. I think it needs to be a 400-mile race. And the same thing goes for Texas. I think Texas needs to be decreased from 500 miles down to 400-mile race. Therefore, there's going to be more intensity with the racing stuff. Now, of course, we've not seen how the next-gen car races on the intermediate tracks. Well, we saw it, but we're not sure how it's going to race at Texas. It may not race great, but we really, really don't know. But why not shorten a race like Texas and Atlanta and not shorten Martinsville? And that's one of the biggest things why I'm seeing a lot of people, including the only issue I have and seeing a lot of people are complaining, is why shorten one of the best tracks on the circuit when the racing was really, really good last year, and shorten one of the best races instead of shortening some of those races that are really, really long, like Texas. I don't get why Texas gets to keep their distance, but why we get to see Atlanta and Dex keep their distance, but why Martinsville gets to have their race lane shortened. I don't disagree with them making a move. I just think that if you're going to shorten a race, you need to shorten both. But I will agree with the fact that most people on this, I think that it's going to create more intensity and it's going to create more excitement. So I'm very neutral on this move because honestly, I think there's positives to this move, but there's also negatives to this move as well. So it's NASCAR's decision. They can make whatever choice they want. I just think that NASCAR could have made a better decision on this heading into this year. So interesting that they've shortened the race length in Martinsville. I'm not against it, but I'm also not for at some points as well. It is what it is, and that's the NASCAR decision, and they get to make a choice on what they do because it's a sport and a professional sport, and they can do what they want in regards to the distance. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next major story of today's episode, as we're talking about Josh Bilicki. As Josh Bilicki is going to be running 6 races with Alpha Prime Racing in 2022, driving, I think, the 45 car in all 6 of those races in 2022. Josh Bilicki was already announced he'd be driving for Spire Motorsports on a part-time basis in 2022 for a majority of the season in 25 races, but he said that he had more plans to be announced, and he'll be joining Alpha Prime Racing's long list of really talented drivers driving for the team in 2022. Of course, you've got Tommy Joe Martin, Cesar Baccarella, Roger Krug, who's a really young prospect who's got a lot of talent. He's going to be joining Ryan Ellis this season. He's going to have Kaz Grall on the team. Sage Kara from IndyCar is going to be on the team, and Josh Bilicki is joining the team as well. First of all, it's kind of a throwback because he used to actually drive the 45 car, I think, when he drove for BG McLeod Motorsports back in the day. But in all seriousness, Josh Bilicki, I think, is someone that is going to be really fun to watch in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. It's good to see that he's getting a lot more opportunities as well, especially for a guy that's only 26 or 27 years old. When you look at everything that Josh Bilicki has done, especially one, look at the Cup Series last year. He was really, really clean with his equipment. That's one thing that you can really rely on Josh Bilicki, especially when it comes to cars. He can take care of his equipment. He only had, I think, like 1 or 2 DNFs all year last year, so he was really clean on the track. Yes, performances weren't absolutely incredible, but he did really, really good throughout the year, and someone that I think that could do a really good job in this car. Now, what are my overall expectations? Number one, I think Josh Bilicki is going to be a contender in some of these races for some top 10s. I think he's someone that will get at least a few top 10s in the NASCAR Xfinity Series, especially with that Cup experience that he's had over the years. I think he's someone that will do very well with the Alpha Prime Racing Group. He's not going to win races. I don't think you should expect Alpha Prime Racing to go from a team that was 20th to 25th last year up to a winning team, unless, of course, he runs super speed races, which I don't think he's running Daytona. I think he can run more races down the road with this team, but he's not going to be running the whole season. But that being said, I am overall very, very excited to see that Josh is getting more opportunities to race Alpha Prime Racing. I think it's having him in the 45 car is absolutely incredible and absolutely awesome. And I hope that he will eventually go full-time with the team. I would think, I'm not sure what sponsor will sponsor him. I would assume that Insurance King, who sponsored him in the past, is probably involved in some sort of capacity with working with Josh Bilicki to probably have some sponsorship next year. So overall, I'm very, very happy to see that Josh Bilicki is getting an opportunity to race at Alpha Prime Racing in 2022. I hope he does really, really good, and hopefully we can see Josh Bilicki get some more starts in the Xfinity Series or even the Truck Series, maybe Spire Motorsports down the road, and he gets to run in all 3 series in 2022. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the final major story of today's episode, as we are talking about Bubba Wallace and the Netflix documentary. That's right, we're talking about the documentary. Netflix has basically said that they will be releasing his new documentary. It's called Race Bubba Wallace on February 22nd, and it will be a 6 45-minute episodes on Netflix. This documentary will be centered around 23XI Racing's first season as an organization before their Talladega win, unfortunately, and this will be centered around Bubba Wallace as well as his come-ups, and we'll talk about Bubba Wallace and his life up to this point. To me, I think I'm really excited for this documentary because what this will open up is, one, this could open up potential of a Drive to Survive series to come into NASCAR. Think about Formula 1 in their growth. Why is Formula 1 grown? Drive to Survive. Drive to Survive has been one of the big reasons why Formula 1 has been increasing in the size of the people watching it this year. And this documentary can, while it may only support Bubba Wallace, it may bring new documentaries into the sport as well. I mean, just remember, USA, I think they're developing a documentary that's supposed to be starting to film at the Clash this year. That's supposed to basically come out, I think, at some point in 2022 on the USA Network. But what reaches more people? Netflix or USA? Netflix is going to reach a much bigger audience, and I think that Netflix could develop something for NASCAR, and I think that's what they're doing with this moment. People have been asking, why are they doing Bubba Wallace, and why are they not doing a guy like Kyle Larson or Chase Elliott? I do agree that I think that they need to develop a documentary around Kyle Larson. But Bubba Wallace, regardless of your opinion, he is probably the most relevant driver outside of NASCAR. Maybe besides Kyle Busch, I think Bubba is the most well-known and recognizable driver outside of NASCAR. Of course, what happened in 2020 is a big reason why, but Bubba Wallace is really recognizable, and he got, of course, a lot of people talk about when he picked up his first career Cup Series victory at Talladega. That got a lot of eyes and a lot of ears on Bubba Wallace in this series as well. And people ask why not Chase Elliott. Chase Elliott actually did have a documentary, and people complained about that being on basically Peacock. People complained about him getting a documentary. And yes, Bubba Wallace only does have one career Cup Series victory, but you have to have something around one of your most relevant drivers. But there are potential negatives to this documentary as well, especially for newer fans. One thing I'm really worried about, especially for people that are coming who watch this, who watch NASCAR, what they're probably going to see is Bubba Wallace is not going to be ultimately every single week a contender for victories. I think in 2022, he's going to be a much better driver. I think in 2022, I think his starting year is going to struggle a little bit more. But I think with Kurt Busch joining 23-11 heading into this year, I think that Bubba Wallace will perform a little bit better this year. I think he'll be more consistently in the top 10, and I think this team will show a lot more pace. But like I said, one thing I'm overall very worried about, especially for Bubba, is I'm very worried that people are going to see that Bubba is performing and winning races, and then they're just going to leave the sport because they see it. Don't get me wrong, you have some people that are overall casual fans and aren't going to say regardless if Bubba is performing or not. But what I'm worried about is that Bubba's getting all this media attention, and it's going to put a lot of pressure on Bubba to ultimately perform. I think Bubba Wallace is not the best driver in the Cup Series. I don't care what anybody says. I don't think he's the best driver, but I think he's a serviceable and a really good driver. But he's not a championship contender yet. He could eventually become a championship contender long-term down the road. He's young enough. He's only, I think, 27 or 28 years old. He's got plenty of time to become a championship contender. But I think it's cool that they are developing a documentary around Bubba Wallace. I think having a documentary around him, I think is very important. It could grow the sport, and I would expect that with this documentary coming out on February 22nd, especially after Daytona 500, because I think the 500 is going to have a lot of people watching with how big the Clash is and how much promotion they've been having toward the Daytona 500. I think it's going to be really big for the sport, but I am worried about issues for Bubba and the growing popularity, but I do think that this could be great for the sport overall as a whole if this documentary overall succeeds. So overall, I hope this documentary succeeds for Bubba Wallace. I think it'll be really awesome, and it's cool they're developing a documentary. There are potential negatives, but there's also a ton of positives overall as well to the future if this documentary extremely succeeds. So, anyway, that is today's long motorsports video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to our channel notification on to be notified when a video does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. List schedule below over that, and comment your thoughts on today's video. What are your thoughts about the Bubba Wallace documentary, and do you think it'll be a very successful documentary or not? And do you think it will lead to more success for NASCAR? Let me know in the comments below. And what are your thoughts about all the other stories we discussed here today on the channel? Let me know in the comments below. I've got a few special products that are on the way this weekend that you'll see over the weekend during the Rolex 24. Probably most of you won't catch it because you'll all be watching the Rolex 24 this weekend. And I think I'm also going to be doing a race review from the Rolex 24 as well at the conclusion of that. So anyway, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's video. And I'll see you guys next time for some more great and awesome NASCAR and other motorsports content on the channel like this. We're close to the Clash, and I'm getting really excited for that.